Good afternoon. It's Friday again. Welcome to The Road to Recovery, The Road to Freedom with Mark. This is my 28-minute slot every Friday where I read you one of my stories about my adventures for a bit of entertainment. I talk about my travels in Europe and Africa and Southeast Asia and all around New Zealand, fishing out on the coast, all kinds of things really, and I must say I've certainly enjoyed writing them. I've done a few of them recently, and they're a little bit different, I find, and interesting. I really enjoy it. It's great stuff and quite a challenge, and of course the other thing that I do is I talk about mental health issues, and that's really the whole point of the show, is to share my experiences and my thoughts with other people, not just those suffering from mental health issues like obsessive compulsive disorder and depression and bipolar and stuff like that, but also for other people that they might understand maybe a little bit about what it's like, and most importantly what they can do to help not just me but everyone who suffers from mental health problems, and in so doing help their own societies, because whilst I believe that we are heading in the right direction, this government at least has made an attempt for the first time in decades to do something. Unfortunately, government is a very blunt instrument, and a lot of the time they start with the best of intentions and they squander an enormous amount of money paying people like $1,000, $2,000 a day to advise them, and those people are not necessarily the people who are going to tell them what they need to know. It's more likely they'll tell them what they want to know. And then with those best of intentions somewhat subverted, they will approach the Parliament only to find their good intentions being watered down by the opposition, because that's the opposition's job, to oppose. And so they diminish the good intentions, they water it down and make it weak, which is what's happened with pretty much every major decision that this government has been able to make, and in so doing they are half as effective as they would, could, should be, or perhaps utterly ineffective. So what I'm saying to you is, don't expect to be saved by your government, by their opposition, or any other politician, or for that matter any philanthropist or well-intentioned do-gooder. They're not going to save you. You're going to sink like a stone unless you do it yourself. The only thing that is going to get us across the line, the only thing that is going to improve the society in which you live, is you. Okay, so you have to do something. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing. You know, I've been doing this show on mental health for many years now, way before this became a popular thing. And indeed, I have been doing things like this pretty much my entire adult life. Now, when I lived in London, I met a young man called James, and James had been brutalised and, you know, really hurt, broken as an individual, and James had pretty much the worst stutter you've ever heard. He would choke on a word and he just couldn't get him out at all. And about a year previous, I had read about an Indian prince who had the same problem, and this counsellor wrote about how he had cured this prince of his stutter by listening to him. He didn't do anything else. He just listened and was patient, and slowly but surely, just talked to him as normal, and slowly but surely this prince's stutter completely vanished, was gone. And I thought, that's what James needs, because as he would talk, people would say the words for him, which didn't help him at all. So what I did was I would have James round to my place and we would drink coffee and talk, and poor old James would just boom, 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 bang away. And slowly but surely, over the next few months, he gained in confidence with me. He got better and better and better until he got to the point where he could talk to me without stuttering at all. It was absolutely incredible. It took 4 or 5 months to get close to that, about 6 months all told, before James was completely at ease with me. And what happened was he started becoming more at ease with other people, and his stutter diminished with others. It didn't completely vanish, but it diminished a lot. And then he met a girl, I think her name was Karen, she was an Australian girl. And that gave James the confidence that he needed. And boom, he was away. He was back to where he should have been. And what really hammered it home to me was that I had made the difference in that young man's life. I didn't ask for any reward. I didn't need it. The reward was in itself, watching that young man get his life back. And that freed me. That was the reward I got. The knowledge that I did something really, really good with my shitty life. And I would encourage you to do the same. It doesn't take a lot. My point is that sometimes all you need to do is just listen. Just sit there, be patient, and listen. You don't have to get them wasted. You don't have to entertain them. Just share a bit of kindness. That's all it really takes. And there will be a ripple effect that will go out throughout your society and change the world in which you live. And what could be finer than that? Knowing that you've done something to make a difference. Because if you don't, and you do nothing, then you are the problem. You exacerbate the situation, and it gets worse if you do nothing. If someone falls, you don't step over them and keep walking. You stop and pick them up. It's just common courtesy, I guess. What you would hope someone else would do for you. You know, I'm not asking you to be a miracle worker or go to any great extremes or make terrible sacrifices. What I'm concerned with is that common courtesy has virtually disappeared from our society. After my show, I go over and get myself a pizza, and I've noticed that none of the young people ever say thank you. They just don't. They just don't anymore. We failed in that regard. And we need to be good leaders so that the young people in our society can see what we do and say, hey, that's good. That's what I want to be. We have to be good role models, because if we are not, then that's what we get at the end. We get people who are completely self-absorbed and are interested only in grabbing and gaining and making things for themselves and, you know, serving themselves only. There are good people in society, and I do meet them, but unfortunately their numbers are too few. So we need to get in behind and just do those few little thoughtful things. We don't have to be miracle workers. We just have to make small changes, and in the end it'll make a huge difference. Right, we've got to get on with today's story, but I just want to say thank you to all the sponsors of the show. You make a huge difference in the lives of people like me who would not otherwise have a voice. Thank you very much to everyone who listens in, not just in the Wairarapa, but in the lovely Hawke's Bay. It's nice to have you people on board, and I look forward to being up that way soon. It's a magic part of the country, and, you know, I'm always envious of that fantastic weather you get up round that way. I'd also like to say a special thank you to Michael and Veronica here at Arrow Radio. This radio station is a not-for-profit organisation, and they do a wonderful job keeping this thing afloat and, having so many great programs. They are so industrious behind the scenes. And thank you to Wairarapa TV for making all this happen and bringing us to that next level where we can spread far and wide and, share with everybody out there our thoughts and our ideas, and maybe, just maybe, we can make a bit of a change for the good in our society. I certainly hope so. Well, this is today's story, and this one, something a bit different. This one is travels in South Africa. I lived in South Africa for the reign of the last two white presidents, Pik Botha and F.W. de Klerk. In about 2 years, I travelled all around southern Africa, down the garden route of South Africa, all the way down the east coast and back up through the middle to Johannesburg and Pretoria. What struck me in the first few days in Johannesburg was the armed soldiers standing on every corner of every governmental building. I felt great unease at the sight of machine guns in the hands of young men. Racial segregation was still apparent everywhere, from the all-black labouring gangs on building sites to the all-white industries like the legal system. There was a sense of nervousness and civil unrest, with the neighbouring Soweto slums splitting at the seams. There were constant reports of killings at rallies and funerals for political radicals. Nelson Mandela was still on Robben Island at the time I arrived, but it was obvious he would soon be released. That would be the catalyst for true democracy and the end of the current apartheid regime. It was obvious the country itself was not ready for all the changes that were about to happen. The 5 major home states of the black people had no infrastructure, lacking simple things like power and water to homes. They were little more than unsightly slums that were in stark contrast to the rest of the country. All of the country outside these home states had an air of normality, and the main cities of each state seemed quite successful despite world trade sanctions. Every city had its own version of segregation, with the Afrikaners living in affluent suburbs in Johannesburg, with huge fences around their perimeters. Every fence was solid and topped with broken bottles and razor wire, giving them a typical fortress effect. The other white tribe in Johannesburg were the English speakers, who spoke English as a first language and held British passports. They lived in suburbs with lower fences but bars on every door and window. The two white tribes were segregated in subtle ways in Johannesburg, but the black people were forced to live in neighbouring Soweto, which at the time numbered some 5 million souls living in poverty. The populations of the white people in each city had a noticeably nicer neighbourhood and had better schooling for their kids. That led to better job opportunities for jobs and industries run by their own people. The system was self-supporting, as South Africa is still rich in diamonds and gold. Fortunes extracted from the earth, however, did not translate to an even spread of wealth. At the other end of the scale were 33 black tribes in South Africa, some of which had no representation in government and suffered terribly as a result. The people of Indian descent were caught in the middle and referred to as coloured. They had some political representation in especially places like Durban and the Natal province. About 1/4 of Durban was made up of Indians, and it surprised me to see such large numbers of Indians in Africa. In nearby Ladysmith, their famous son, Mahatma Gandhi, worked as a lawyer before becoming famous for his peace protesting and political career. Despite some influence, the Indians lived as second-class citizens and tended to live mainly along the east coast. In Durban, there are some 11 kilometres of beautiful coastline with wonderful beaches all the way round. In the middle of the wealthiest section of the strip were 2 beautiful skyscrapers, the Maharani and the Ilangeni. One had a glass lift up the outside of the building to a nightclub at the top. Despite its political isolation, places like Durban, with its massive port, managed to thrive. Apartheid had a weaker hold on the population of Durban as opposed to Pretoria and Johannesburg. It seemed to lessen as we headed south and away from the spiritual and political homeland of the Afrikaners. So it seemed to hold true as we pulled into Cape Town with its incredible Table Mountain and Lion Rock. Cape Town itself seemed far more at ease, with far less obvious segregation. We booked ourselves an apartment in the Green Lane area of the Cape and returned to take the gondola ride up Table Mountain, which is a flat plateau. The view from the top was simply breathtaking, as the mountain offered a 180-degree panoramic view from wherever you stood. It felt like God's window on the world from up there and reminded me of the Drakensberg Ranges and its spectacular view over the city below. No matter which direction you look at in this beautiful city, Table Mountain dominates with its awe-inspiring presence. Cape Town had some decent nightlife too. We found a little place called the Pig and Whistle, which was a great place for a feed, then drink and dance to a local rock band. We had a great time there, drinking and dancing on the tables, as was the custom there. There was a noticeable lessening of segregation here too, with all races allowed on the same buses and some of the same beaches. Even so, there was talk of local Cape Malay people suffering poverty and squatter camps springing up on the outskirts. In all our travels around southern Africa, Cape Town was probably the most relaxed and free from the political plague that apartheid had become. Its great beauty is icing on the cake, and it is a place that stays long in the memory, as it must rate as one of the most beautiful cities in the world. Altogether too soon, we headed up country from Cape Town on to Stellenbosch, through the Little and Great Karoo to Kimberley. The famous diamond mining town features a 1 kilometre hole in the ground, and the area still produces diamonds to this day. The area also features some particularly fine vineyards, and we were treated to some wonderful wine. Even so, there was a marked difference in the political situation as we drove up north. By the time we reached the Orange Free State, we were back in the old South Africa we had witnessed in Pretoria and Johannesburg. It was strange to witness different versions of apartheid in the one place. All of the country was in a state of permanent change, like it or not. The last two successive white governments realised they were little more than night watchmen, waiting for the new South Africa to be born. They mainly concerned themselves with trying to keep law and order and stopping the country from spiralling into war, as so many of its neighbours had done. One of our more interesting little adventures happened in Durban when we went to the Currie Cup finals. Standing out as Kiwis meant we met plenty of people interested in our journey and our impressions of the country. They were wonderful hosts, and one guy, Dave, offered to introduce us to a rugby-mad friend, Api Kitching, who lived with his family under a local stadium. He took us from Kings Park to Parks Rugby Club to meet Api, who immediately asked the four of us to stay with him and meet some of his friends. Api, who was Afrikaans, and his wife, an English speaker, were wonderful hosts and lived in an amazing flat built under the stadium that Api looked after. We stayed for a few days before Api took us out to the countryside to Potenzi to meet some of his friends who grew oranges for a living. We didn't know what to expect and were amazed to see orchards as far as the eye could see, in a valley serviced by a large dam they had built for themselves. We were taken to the homestead of Zol Ferreira, a descendant of Portuguese and Afrikaans, who had carved out an oasis for themselves in a very harsh land. As well as oranges, Zol had an ostrich farm for extra income. Another relative and neighbour kept antelope for local consumption in local braai fests or barbecue feasts, held for all the local folks. The first day and night we stayed there, Zol turned on one of these massive feasts for the four of us. All of the neighbours from miles around came over to meet us, and it turned out most of them were elated. They lived in their valley pretty isolated from the rest of the country in a small microcosm of South Africa. Whilst there, we met a relative, Espy Ferreira, the richest of the orchardists, who invited us to come over and visit. He owned a massive orchard in the middle of the valley, along with the local packing sheds, a bottle store, and a few other shops in the small village he and his ancestors had built. He also had many black folk working for him, and their families lived on his land in very primitive conditions. The orchardists there could not see why the black workers should live any differently, despite the massive contrast in their lives. Even so, the orchardists were heavily armed in case of civil uprising. They were very isolated in Potenzie, and almost all of them belonged to the Dutch Reformed Church and are staunch believers. We stayed at Zol's place as he had plenty of room with servants to help run the place. It was very strange for me to be waited on by maids, but they seemed very happy with their situation. There was also plenty of land and hills to explore, and on our third night there we headed up the back of the property to catch some live game. The idea was to spotlight the antelope using utes, then to herd them up and jump off the back of the utes and rugby tackle them and tie them up. It was a dangerous exercise jumping off the back of the utes at some speed, so it was left for the black folks to do. I joined up with them in the back of the ute, and soon we were jumping out to tackle the poor panicking antelope. A few guys got quite badly banged up, and we managed to capture 3 female buck, which were trussed up and transported to the local farm. I was surprised that everyone took their situation in life without question or complaint, but that was how they had grown up, and they had never known any different. Even so, it was difficult to talk to the black folks living in Potenzie, as they did not want to offend the white orchardists who employed them. It seemed there was little option for them, and schooling was a luxury not afforded them. I felt sad for them, as I could not see any form of democracy would change their lot. This was the case in much of South Africa, and no magic wand of political change would free people from their predestined place in society. The black people living in Potenzie seemed to care little for the change about to happen, and it was obvious that significant change would happen a generation at a time. It had to start with literacy and political awareness before any significant change could take place. As far as the orchardists were concerned, they had carved out this piece of paradise with their own hands and could not see any reason for change. They were worried that the future would bring change to their well-ordered society and the country would fall into chaos. They had already watched as Angola, Mozambique, Northern and Southern Rhodesia had gone through civil war and fallen into rack and ruin. They did not believe that Mandela could bring change without civil uprising, and their fears seemed well-founded. They did not, however, see anything wrong with the existing system as it offered stability and certainty. In the end, however, it was a numbers game, and when everyone in the country was granted a vote, their point of view would be swept aside in a wave of change. Our hosts were really decent people who could not do enough for us, so I felt sorry for them as well as they faced a world of change. The future was uncertain, but everyone hoped it would spell the end of political sanctions and allow South Africa to rejoin the rest of the free world. I was surprised at the Africans' resilience, despite being in the political wilderness. For all of its troubles, South Africa was easily the most sophisticated and robust of the countries we visited in southern Africa. That resilience gave me hope that they would find a way to cope with the change about to come. After a wonderful and enlightening stay at Patenzing, it was altogether too soon that we had to say goodbye. The valley really was a microcosm of South Africa itself, with an uncertain future but the potential to grow and flourish with new change. In the many years since I visited South Africa, the ANC's Mandela government came and went. It did not deliver the hoped-for change, but to me was astonishing for the lack of bloodshed. The Mandela government was able to convey the message of hope and especially forgiveness. This stopped the country from descending into civil war and allowed a smoother transition from white to majority rule. I was surprised at the lack of civil unrest and hoped this peaceful beginning would lead to a prosperous future. Unfortunately, this was too much to expect, as South Africa was very set in its ways and not all change could happen quickly. Most people hoped for immediate change, whereas real and meaningful change will more likely take generations. I think the Mandela years delivered all it was capable of. I hope the future will bring the freedoms all of South Africa's people yearn for. I believe it is now up to all of the countries who placed embargoes and sanctions to deliver on promises of acceptance and open trade. I expect, however, South Africa will take a long time to recover, and I feel sorry for all those wonderful people I met on my journeys. I look back now on that journey with a melancholy heart, as it is a place where I left a little piece of myself. I will never forget the promise of the burning sunrise and the incredible red sunsets of a place I came to love. I hope for her a better future. Well, there we go. 28 minutes just flies by, and boy did that bring some wonderful memories back to me. I met so many great people, white, black, coloured, all of them. You know, just some fantastic people who were just ever so kind, and I really didn't want to leave Africa. I thought I would stay there for the rest of my life. It's such a fascinating place and such wonderful, resourceful people, but I had to move on, and I went to London and I lived there for 5 years and travelled around Europe, and I had a great time when I was a young man, and I really enjoy bringing these stories to you. I hope you enjoy hearing them, and I hope you tune in next week. Tell your friends about it, share this, and do what you can for your community, because Arrow Radio, all of this is all about community. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you again later. Bye for now.